The 42nd floor of the Manhattan Medical Center hummed with expensive silence. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below like scattered diamonds. But Marcus Whitfield saw none of it. His reflection stared back from the glass. Graying temples, a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and eyes that had forgotten how to rest. 6 months. 183 days since the accident. Since his 12-year-old son had ridden his bicycle into traffic chasing a soccer ball that rolled into the street. Since machines became more important than bedtime stories. Marcus adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The gesture had become a nervous habit, something to do with hands that used to ruffle hair and tie shoelaces. Now they signed checks. Endless checks for the best neurologists, the finest equipment, the most exclusive private room money could buy. Mr. Whitfield? Dr. Morrison's voice cut through his thoughts. The monthly review is ready. Marcus turned from the window, his movements sharp and controlled. Everything about him spoke of precision, the way he straightened his shoulders, how he checked his phone with military efficiency, the measured steps across marble floors. Control was his language. It had built his empire, acquired properties worth hundreds of millions, commanded boardrooms full of executives twice his age, but control meant nothing here. The medical reports spread across Dr. Morrison's desk like accusations. Charts with flat lines, brain scans showing minimal activity, progress notes that repeated the same clinical phrases. Stable condition. No significant change. Continued monitoring required. The care team remains optimistic, Doctor. Morrison said, his tone carefully neutral. These cases require patience. Patience. Marcus had bought the most expensive patience money could offer. Private nurses around the clock, specialized equipment, a room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital space. Yet something gnawed at him, a businessman's instinct that whispered of inefficiency, of gaps between payment and performance. I want detailed reports, Marcus heard himself say. Daily, hourly if necessary. Sir, the nursing staff provides comprehensive documentation. I pay for excellence. I expect transparency. Dr. Morrison nodded, accustomed to demanding families. But as Marcus left the office, his footsteps echoing in sterile corridors, the doctor couldn't shake a feeling of unease. There was something in Marcus Whitfield's eyes that went beyond parental concern. Something that resembled hunger. Back in his penthouse that evening, Marcus stood in his son's untouched bedroom. Baseball trophies lined the shelves. Homework assignments still waited on the desk, frozen in time like everything else in his world. He picked up a photograph, him and Jamie at last year's Yankees game, both grinning, hot dogs in hand. The boy in the picture seemed like a stranger now. So did the man beside him. Marcus set the frame down with trembling hands. Tomorrow he would implement his plan. Cameras, discreet professional-grade surveillance that would show him everything the medical staff wouldn't. He told himself it was about accountability, about ensuring his son received the care he paid for. But deep in the hollow space, where his heart used to beat steadily, Marcus knew it was about something else entirely. It was about watching from a distance, because getting close meant facing the possibility that all his money, all his control, might not be enough to bring his son back. The penthouse felt vast and empty around him. Outside, Manhattan glittered with a million lights, but inside, darkness gathered like a familiar friend. The security consultant arrived at dawn, carrying equipment in nondescript black cases. Marcus had chosen him carefully, discreet, expensive, no questions asked. The kind of man who installed surveillance in penthouses for paranoid billionaires and divorce lawyers. Room 4217, Marcus said, handing over the hospital blueprints. I need complete coverage, audio and visual. How many subjects? 1 patient, 12 years old. I want to see everything, every nurse, every visitor, every procedure. The consultant nodded without judgment. Rich men had their reasons. His job was installation, not ethics. Marcus watched from his office as the man worked, using hospital maintenance credentials Marcus had quietly arranged. The cameras would be invisible, embedded in air vents, disguised as smoke detectors, woven into the fabric of medical normalcy. His phone buzzed. Another board meeting he should attend, another deal requiring his signature. The empire that had taken 20 years to build now felt like background noise. Nothing mattered except the feeds that would soon stream directly to his tablet. Testing complete, the consultant reported. Full HD, night vision. Audio clarity at 95%. Remote access established. Marcus transferred the payment without looking at the amount. Money had lost meaning. It was just another tool, like the cameras, like the endless medical bills that arrived with mechanical precision. That afternoon, he sat in his car outside the hospital, tablet balanced on his steering wheel. Room 4217 materialized on the screen in crisp detail. His son lay motionless in the center of the frame, surrounded by machines that blinked and hummed with artificial life. A nurse entered, young, efficient, checking vitals with practiced movements. She spoke to Jamie as she worked, her voice gentle but professional. Marcus leaned closer, studying her face, cataloguing her actions. Was she thorough enough? Did she truly care? Or was this just another shift? She left after 8 minutes. Marcus rewound the footage, watching again and again, searching for something, negligence, shortcuts, proof that his suspicions were justified. But the nurse had been competent, even kind. It frustrated him more than discovering actual misconduct would have. Evening brought a different staff. The night nurse was older, more methodical. She adjusted Jamie's position every 2 hours, spoke less, but moved with quiet confidence. Marcus found himself taking notes, creating detailed logs of every interaction. The surveillance had been intended to catch failures. Instead, it revealed a world he'd never seen, the machinery of care operating around his son's still form. It should have reassured him. Instead, it left him feeling more isolated than ever. Alone in his penthouse later, Marcus scrolled through hours of footage, frame after frame of his son's motionless body, surrounded by strangers who touched him with clinical gentleness. People who saw Jamie every day, but would never know he collected baseball cards, or that he'd been afraid of thunderstorms until last spring. The cameras showed everything except what Marcus most wanted to see. His son opening his eyes, moving, returning to the world of the living. But watching had become compulsive, a digital vigil that felt like connection, but offered only the illusion of presence. Marcus fell asleep at his desk, the tablet still glowing with images of room 4217. 10 days into his digital vigil, Marcus had memorized every routine. The morning blood draw at 6:30, physical therapy at 10:15, Dr. Morrison's rounds at 2 SAU. Each event catalogued, timed, analyzed for efficiency. He'd filled 3 notebooks with observations. Nurse Patricia laughed too loudly during shift changes. Dr. Reynolds checked his phone twice during examinations. The respiratory therapist arrived 4 minutes late on average. Small infractions. Nothing that justified his growing obsession. Then she appeared. Marcus almost missed her the first time. A woman in pale blue scrubs wheeling a cleaning cart down the corridor. She entered Jamie's room at 11:47 p.m., well past normal cleaning schedules. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting the screen brightness. She was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled back severely. Her movements were different from the medical staff, slower, more deliberate. She began cleaning with methodical precision, but something felt off. She was taking too long. Marcus checked the timestamp. 18 minutes for what should have been a 5-minute task. He watched her dust surfaces that appeared already clean, reorganize supplies that didn't need organizing. Inefficiency bothered him like a splinter under skin. But then she did something unexpected. She approached Jamie's bed and spoke to him. Not the professional patter of medical staff, but something softer. Spanish words Marcus couldn't understand. Her hand briefly touched Jamie's forehead, a gesture too intimate for a cleaning woman. Marcus's jaw tightened. This was exactly what he'd been looking for. Staff overstepping boundaries, breaking protocol. He reached for his phone to call the hospital administrator. His finger hovered over the contact. The woman was praying now, her lips moving silently. Her free hand held Jamie's, and for a moment something shifted in the boy's face. Not consciousness. Marcus had learned to recognize false hope, but the subtlest relaxation of features that had been locked in artificial sleep. The moment passed. The woman released Jamie's hand, crossed herself quietly, and resumed cleaning, as if nothing had happened. Marcus set down his phone. Over the following nights she returned, always between 11:30 and midnight, always staying longer than necessary. She brought small things, a different pillow positioning, softer lighting, sometimes a tiny flower placed on the windowsill. Marcus found himself waiting for her appearances. He cancelled evening meetings, ignored calls from his assistant, sat transfixed by this unexpected intrusion into his ordered surveillance. The woman, he still didn't know her name, had become an anomaly in his data, something that didn't fit the clinical precision he'd expected to find. She sang sometimes, soft Spanish lullabies that the microphones barely captured. Jamie's vital signs never changed dramatically, but Marcus noticed subtle variations. Heart rate slightly more stable, breathing patterns marginally improved. Correlation wasn't causation. Marcus knew this, but he also knew the numbers, and something was happening during her visits that the medical charts couldn't quantify. Dr. Morrison had mentioned environmental factors in recovery. Familiar voices, consistent stimuli, human connection. Marcus had dismissed it as medical mysticism. Now, watching this stranger care for his son with inexplicable tenderness, he wondered if his skepticism had been another form of control. She finished her work and paused at Jamie's bedside one final time. Her weathered hand smoothed his hair with maternal gentleness. Then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of hospital disinfectant and something Marcus couldn't name. He rewound the footage, studying her face in the blue glow of medical equipment. There was sadness there, but also something else. Purpose. A quality Marcus hadn't seen in his own reflection for months. The cleaning woman had no idea she was being watched. Her actions carried no performative quality, no awareness of audience. They were simply human. For the first time since installing the cameras, Marcus felt ashamed. Marcus found himself researching the hospital's staffing records with the same intensity he once applied to hostile takeovers. The cleaning woman's name was Luz Morales, 48 years old, employed for 7 years. No disciplinary actions, consistent performance reviews, perfect attendance except for 3 days last December. He dug deeper. Immigration records showed she'd arrived from El Salvador 15 years ago. A single address in Queens shared with an elderly woman. Her mother, according to emergency contact forms. No husband listed. No children. The information felt invasive, but Marcus couldn't stop. Understanding her became as compulsive as watching her. During his lunch break, he found himself parked outside the hospital's service entrance, waiting. At 3:15 p.m., Luz emerged with 2 other cleaning staff. She moved with quiet dignity, her uniform pressed despite obvious wear. The other women laughed and chattered. Luz smiled politely but remained apart. She rode the subway alone. Marcus followed at a distance, feeling ridiculous yet unable to resist. She got off at Roosevelt Avenue, walking through streets that showed a different New York. Bodegas with hand-painted signs, children playing in small concrete parks, elderly men gathered around domino tables. Luz entered a small apartment building. Marcus waited in his car, unsure what he'd hoped to accomplish. Through a ground-floor window, he glimpsed an elderly woman in a wheelchair, Luz kneeling beside her with patient tenderness. The scene struck him with unexpected force. This woman who touched his son with such care was caring for someone else, in circumstances far from the sterile luxury of the medical center. That evening, Marcus watched the hospital feeds with new eyes. Luce arrived for her shift at 11 p.m., the same serious expression on her face. But now, Marcus noticed details he'd missed. The way she moved through corridors with practiced efficiency, how other night staff nodded respectfully when they passed her. She entered Jamie's room, carrying something small, a worn children's book, its cover faded from handling. She placed it on the bedside table and began reading aloud in accented English, her voice soft and musical. Peter was a rabbit who lived with his mother in a sandbank, underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Marcus leaned forward, incredulous. She was reading Beatrix Potter to his unconscious son. The absurdity should have outraged him. Instead, something loosened in his chest. Luz read for 10 minutes, then carefully marked her place with a hospital tissue. She resumed her cleaning duties, but Marcus noticed she kept glancing back at Jamie, as if checking on a sleeping child. When she finished, she approached the bed one final time. Her hand found Jamie's, and she spoke in Spanish again. Marcus caught fragments. Mijo, which he knew meant my child, and mañana, tomorrow. She was promising to return. Marcus spent the remainder of the night researching Luz Morales more thoroughly. Property records showed the Queen's apartment was subsidized housing. Hospital payroll revealed a salary that barely covered basic expenses. Yet she'd chosen to work nights in a pediatric wing, caring for children who weren't hers. The contradiction troubled him. In his world, people acted from self-interest. They performed duties for compensation, maintained relationships for advantage. Lucy's behavior defied this logic. He found himself wondering about her story. Why no family of her own? What brought an immigrant woman to read bedtime stories to a stranger's child? The questions circled in his mind like prayers he'd forgotten how to say. By dawn, Marcus had made a decision that surprised him. Instead of reporting Luz for protocol violations, he would learn more. Not through surveillance this time, but through something he'd avoided for months: direct human contact. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 11:45 p.m., feeling like a trespasser in his own son's life. He'd never visited this late before. The corridors hummed with different energy, quieter, more intimate. Night brought out different truths. He walked slowly toward Jamie's room, rehearsing casual explanations for his presence. But as he approached, he heard Lucy's voice through the partially open door. And Mrs. Tiggy Winkle was an excellent clear starcher, and she ironed as smoothly as anyone could wish. Marcus stopped. Through the doorway, he could see Luce sitting beside Jamie's bed, the children's book open in her lap. Her voice carried a musical quality that made the simple words sound like lullabies. Jamie's hand rested in hers. Something caught in Marcus's throat. For 6 months, he'd paid nurses to monitor vital signs and adjust equipment. But this woman was reading bedtime stories to his unconscious son, holding his hand as if he might wake up asking for water or complaining about nightmares. "Mr. Whitfield?" Marcus turned. Dr. Reynolds stood behind him, tablet in hand, looking surprised. "I couldn't sleep," Marcus said quickly. "Wanted to check on Jamie." Dr. Reynolds nodded, understanding. "The night shift is excellent. Very thorough care." Through the doorway, Lucy's voice continued. She'd reached the part where Mrs. Tiggy Winkle revealed her true nature as a hedgehog. Marcus remembered reading this story to Jamie years ago, back when bedtime still meant tucked blankets and promises about monsters under the bed. "She's reading to him," Marcus observed. Dr. Reynolds followed his gaze. "Luce? Yes, she's special. Been here longer than most. She has a way with the children. Is that normal? Reading stories? Not required, but not discouraged either. Some staff members form attachments." Dr. Reynolds paused. "Your son responds well to her presence. Subtle changes, but measurable." Marcus's pulse quickened. What kind of changes? Nothing dramatic, but his sleep cycles seem more natural when she's here. Heart rate variability shows improvement. Could be coincidental. Could be. But Marcus had been watching those same monitors for weeks, and he knew the patterns. Luz's presence coincided with Jamie's most stable periods. Dr. Reynolds moved on to check other patients. Marcus remained in the corridor, listening to Luz finish the story. When she closed the book, she spoke to Jamie in Spanish again. Her tone was encouraging, as if coaxing a shy child to respond. She began to clean, but her movements were different when she thought no one was watching. Gentler. She straightened Jamie's blanket with maternal care, adjusted the blinds to soften the harsh fluorescent lighting. Small acts of tenderness that went far beyond job requirements. When she finished, she gathered her supplies quietly. Marcus stepped back into the shadows, allowing her to leave without confrontation. But as she passed, he caught a glimpse of her face in the corridor lighting. There were tears in her eyes. Marcus stood alone outside his son's room, processing what he'd witnessed. This wasn't about medical protocol or professional duty. Luz was grieving something, and somehow his son had become part of that grief. He entered Jamie's room for the first time in weeks without the barrier of surveillance footage. The space felt different at night, more peaceful, charged with the residual warmth of Luz's presence. The children's book lay on the bedside table, its worn pages evidence of countless readings. Marcus picked it up, recognizing the addition from Jamie's childhood collection. But this copy was different, older, more loved, personal. He opened it carefully. On the inside cover, written in careful script, were the words, "Para Miguel con amor de mamá," for Miguel, with love from Mom. The book wasn't hospital property. It was Luz's own, brought from home. A child's book kept by a childless woman, now shared with his son. Marcus sat in the chair Luz had occupied, the book heavy in his hands. He understood now why she cried. She wasn't just caring for Jamie. She was caring for the child she'd lost, finding purpose in the space between professional duty and personal sorrow. For the first time since the accident, Marcus felt something other than helpless rage. He felt grateful. Tomorrow, he would find a way to thank her without revealing how much he knew. Tonight, he would simply sit with his son in the quiet aftermath of someone else's love. The next evening, Marcus returned earlier, positioning himself in the family lounge where he could observe the corridor. He'd spent the day researching Miguel Morales, Luz's son, who died 3 years ago at age 10 from complications following surgery. The medical records Marcus shouldn't have been able to access told a story of a mother fighting an impossible battle against time and insufficient insurance. Now he understood the tears, the tenderness, the children's book worn soft from desperate readings in another hospital room. Luz arrived at her usual time, moving through her rounds with quiet efficiency. Marcus watched her interact with other night staff, polite but distant, professional but not warm. She reserved something different for the children's rooms. At 11:30, she entered Jamie's room. Marcus gave her 10 minutes before making his move. He knocked softly on the doorframe. "Excuse me." Luz looked up from organizing medical supplies, startled. Her eyes widened with recognition. She knew he was Jamie's father, though they'd never been introduced. "Mr. Whitfield," she said carefully, straightening. "I was just finishing the cleaning. Please don't stop." Marcus stepped inside, noting how she positioned herself between him and Jamie protectively. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me." Her accent softened the words. "For the extra attention you give my son. I've noticed the care you take." Luz's expression became guarded. In her world, notice from wealthy families usually meant trouble. "I do my job, sir. You do more than that." Marcus moved closer to Jamie's bed, studying his son's peaceful face. "Dr. Reynolds mentioned Jamie responds well to your presence. The children, they need—" Luz paused, searching for words. "They need to know someone cares, even when they sleep." Why do you care? He's not your family. The question hung between them, too direct and too honest. Luz's hands stilled on her cleaning cloth. In this place, she said finally, children without visitors, they become everyone's family. Marcus realized she thought Jamie was alone, that his surveillance from a distance looked like abandonment. I'm here now, he said quietly. See, you are here now. They stood in awkward silence, separated by class and language and grief neither knew how to articulate. But Jamie lay between them, a bridge of shared concern. The book, Marcus said. Beatrix Potter. I heard you reading yesterday. Luz froze. Reading to patients definitely violated protocol. She waited for reprimand or dismissal. Instead, Marcus said, Jamie loved those stories when he was younger. I used to read them to him. I can stop. No. The word came out more forcefully than intended. Please don't stop. I think he likes hearing them again. Something shifted in Luz's posture. The defensive wariness remained, but underneath it, Marcus glimpsed relief. Sometimes I think he listens, she admitted. When I read his breathing changes, maybe I imagine it. You don't imagine it. I've seen the monitor readings. This surprised her. She studied Marcus with new curiosity, trying to reconcile the absent father she'd assumed him to be, with someone who paid attention to medical details. Your son, she said carefully. He has strong spirit. I feel it when I sit with him. You sit with him. Only for a moment, after cleaning. The admission came reluctantly. I know it's not my place. It is your place, Marcus said, the words surprising him. It is absolutely your place. Luz looked at him directly for the first time, searching his face for sincerity or trap. Finding neither, she nodded slowly. Miguel, Marcus said gently. The book was his. Her intake of breath was sharp, painful. She hadn't expected this stranger to know her private grief. How do you... I'm sorry for your loss. Luz's composure wavered. 3 years of careful professional distance cracked, revealing the mother underneath the cleaning woman. He loved stories too, she whispered. Always asking for one more chapter, one more page. Tell me about him. The request was gentle, but unexpected. In Luz's experience, wealthy people didn't ask cleaning women about their dead children. But something in Marcus's voice suggested genuine interest. She spoke haltingly at first, then with growing warmth. Miguel had been curious, funny, terrible at soccer, but excellent at drawing. He'd wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up. Marcus listened without interruption, recognizing the sacred quality of a mother's memories. When she finished, tears streaked her cheeks unashamed. Thank you, she said, for letting me tell you. Marcus nodded, understanding that sharing Miguel's story had been a gift she didn't often give. They stood together in Jamie's room, two parents separated by everything except the thing that mattered most, children who needed them in ways they were still learning to provide. The call came at 2:47 a.m., jolting Marcus from restless sleep. Elena's voice cut through the darkness, sharp with familiar authority. I'm back from Zurich. We need to talk about Jamie's situation. His ex-wife's words carried the efficiency that had once attracted him and ultimately driven them apart. Everything was a situation to Eleanor. Their marriage, their divorce, now their son's condition. It's late, Marcus said, though he was already reaching for his clothes. I've been reviewing the bills. Do you have any idea what you're spending? 40,000 a month, Marcus. For what? He's not getting better. The words hit like physical blows. Marcus had avoided calculating the total costs, treating money as irrelevant when measured against hope. But Elena reduced everything to spreadsheets. He's getting the best care available. He's getting the most expensive care available. There's a difference. They met at an all-night diner near the hospital, neutral territory that reeked of coffee and failed dreams. Elena looked exactly as she had 6 months ago, perfectly composed, her grief organized into manageable compartments. The doctors in Switzerland have new perspectives on vegetative states, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Cost-effective approaches. Jamie could receive adequate care for a tenth of what we're paying now. Marcus opened the folder, seeing charts comparing facilities, mortality rates, quality assessments. Elena had reduced their son to data points. Adequate isn't enough. Neither is bankrupting ourselves for false hope. Elena's voice softened slightly. Marcus, I know this is hard, but we have to be realistic. Realistic means giving up on him. Realistic means accepting that throwing money at tragedy doesn't change the outcome. Jamie needs care, yes. But he needs realistic care, not this fantasy we're funding. Marcus thought of Luz, reading bedtime stories, holding Jamie's hand, speaking to him as if he could hear. Was that fantasy too? There's a facility in Connecticut, Eleanor continued. Excellent reputation, proper protocols. Jamie would receive everything he needs medically, but not everything he needs as a person. He's not a person anymore, Marcus. He's our son and we love him, but he's not coming back. The brutal honesty hung between them like a verdict. Marcus had paid to avoid hearing those words, surrounded Jamie with expensive equipment and premium care to muffle that possibility. You don't know that. Neither do you. But I know what the bills look like, what the prognosis says, what the doctors actually think when they're not being paid to be encouraging. Marcus felt something cracking inside him. 6 months of surveillance, of watching strangers care for his son, of discovering that love came in forms he'd never recognized, all of it threatened by Elena's ruthless pragmatism. 1 month, he heard himself say. Give me 1 month to show you he's improving. Elena studied him with the cool assessment that had made her a successful corporate lawyer. What aren't you telling me? You're different, more invested than before. He's my son, our son, and I won't let guilt destroy what's left of our family's future. Elena closed the folder decisively. 2 weeks, Marcus, then we transfer him somewhere sustainable. She left without ordering food, her efficiency intact. Marcus sat alone in the fluorescent diner, surrounded by the debris of other people's midnight desperation. 2 weeks to prove that $40,000 a month bought something Elena couldn't quantify. 2 weeks to justify his surveillance, his obsession, his growing connection to a cleaning woman who read stories to unconscious children. 2 weeks to admit that he'd been paying for the illusion of control when what Jamie actually needed was something much simpler and infinitely more complex. Human love. Dr. Blair materialized in Marcus's peripheral vision like a storm cloud, his administrative clipboard clutched with territorial authority. Marcus had been observing Luz through the corridor window, timing her extended presence in Jamie's room. 17 minutes tonight, 3 above her usual pattern. Mr. Whitfield, I need to discuss a staffing concern. Marcus turned, recognizing the hospital's head of operations. Blair had the demeanor of someone who measured success in efficiency metrics rather than patient outcomes. What kind of concern? One of our cleaning staff has been overstepping boundaries. Luz Morales. She's spending excessive time with patients, particularly your son. Marcus's chest tightened. Is that problematic? It violates several protocols. Cleaning staff aren't trained for patient interaction. Her extended presence could interfere with medical procedures or compromise sterile environments. Through the window, Marcus watched Luz adjusting Jamie's pillows with careful attention. She spoke softly to him while she worked, her movements gentle and deliberate. She seems competent. Competency isn't the issue. Boundaries are. We've received reports that she's reading to patients, holding hands, even praying. That's outside her job description. And if the patients benefit from it? Dr. Blair's expression sharpened. Benefit is a medical determination, not something cleaning staff can assess. We're implementing new protocols to ensure appropriate role separation. What does that mean? Ms. Morales will be reassigned to surgical floors. Adult patients, stricter supervision. The pediatric wing requires staff who maintain professional distance. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. She's been here 7 years without incident, which makes this boundary crossing more concerning. Institutional standards exist for reasons, Mr. Whitfield. I'm sure you understand the importance of proper protocols in your business. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Marcus had built his empire on systems, hierarchies, clear delineations of responsibility. But watching loose with Jamie had shown him the limitations of institutional thinking. When does this reassignment take effect? Monday. We're bringing in someone more suitable for the pediatric environment. Someone who understands appropriate professional boundaries. That gave Marcus 3 days. 3 days before the one person who seemed to genuinely connect with his son disappeared into the hospital's bureaucratic machinery. Dr. Blair, Marcus said carefully, I've noticed Jamie responds positively to Ms. Morales' presence. Surely that's medically relevant. Anecdotal observations aren't clinical evidence. And even if they were, we can't make staffing decisions based on one patient's supposed preferences. The dismissal was final. Absolute. Marcus recognized the tone. He'd used it himself countless times to shut down inconvenient arguments from subordinates. I see. I knew you'd understand. Successful institutions require clear boundaries and appropriate role enforcement. Dr. Blair departed with bureaucratic satisfaction, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of Elena's ultimatum, and now this new complication. 2 weeks to prove Jamie was improving, but the person who seemed most connected to that improvement was being removed. Inside Jamie's room, Luz finished her work and approached his bedside for her customary goodbye. She spoke in Spanish again, her hand briefly touching his forehead. Even through the glass, Marcus could see the tenderness in her gesture. She didn't know yet, didn't know this was one of her last nights with the children she'd quietly adopted into her heart. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the hospital administrator's direct number. Money talked in institutional settings. Donations bought influence. Perhaps he could find a way to intervene. But as he prepared to dial, a disturbing thought surfaced. Was he about to use his wealth to manipulate hospital policies for personal reasons? Was this about Jamie's welfare, or about maintaining the surveillance routine that had become his only connection to his son? The distinction mattered. Elena's accusations about throwing money at tragedy echoed in his mind, but this wasn't about expensive equipment or premium facilities. This was about preserving something human in an institutional environment, something that couldn't be bought but might be protected. Marcus dialed the number, knowing he was crossing a line but unable to stop himself. Some boundaries deserved to be violated. The hospital administrator's voice carried calculated warmth when he returned Marcus's call at 6 a.m. Mr. Whitfield, always a pleasure. What can we do for our most generous benefactor? Marcus had donated $3 million to the children's wing 2 years ago, tax write-off money that meant nothing to him but everything to hospital politics. I understand there are staffing changes being made in pediatrics, specifically regarding Luz Morales. Ah, yes, Dr. Blair mentioned some protocol concerns. Nothing serious, just administrative restructuring. I'd like Ms. Morales to remain in her current assignment. The pause was brief but telling. May I ask why you have interest in a specific cleaning staff member? Marcus had prepared for this question. My son responds well to consistency. Familiar faces during his treatment seem beneficial. Of course. Family preferences are always considered, but Dr. Blair has legitimate concerns about boundary maintenance. What would it take to address those concerns while keeping Ms. Morales in place? Another pause. Marcus could practically hear calculations being made. The value of his past donations weighed against administrative headaches. Perhaps additional training? Clearer protocols? We could establish guidelines for appropriate patient interaction while maintaining her current assignment. That sounds reasonable. I'm prepared to fund whatever training or supervision is required. Your generosity continues to amaze us, Mr. Whitfield. I'll speak with Dr. Blair immediately. Marcus ended the call feeling sick. He'd just bought a human being's job with the casual authority he'd once used to acquire real estate. The ease with which money solved institutional problems was both impressive and disgusting. But when he watched Luce enter Jamie's room that evening, unaware that her employment had hung in the balance and been rescued by forces she'd never know about, Marcus felt the discomfort was worth it. Until Dr. Morrison appeared in the corridor. "Mr. Whitfield, could we talk privately?" They walked to Morrison's office, where medical charts covered the desk like accusatory evidence. "I've been reviewing Jamie's files and I noticed something interesting. His most stable periods correlate with specific times, always during night shifts, specifically during Luz Morales' presence." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Is that significant?" "It could be. Environmental factors can influence unconscious patients more than we previously understood. Consistent stimuli, familiar voices, even physical touch might promote neural stability. So her presence is actually beneficial. Potentially, but there's another possibility." Dr. Morrison's expression grew serious. "How often do you visit your son, Mr. Whitfield?" The question felt like an ambush. "I'm here regularly." "During the day, yes, but Jamie's improvements occur at night. When you're not here, but she is." Marcus realized where this was leading and felt trapped by his own deception. "What are you suggesting?" "That children in extended unconscious states sometimes respond to surrogate attachment figures. If Jamie has formed some kind of unconscious bond with Ms. Morales, that could explain the physiological improvements." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's complicated. If Jamie is responding to her specifically, rather than general human interaction, removing her could cause regression. But it also suggests—" Dr. Morrison chose his words carefully. "It suggests Jamie may have unconsciously replaced absent family connections with available substitutes." The implication was clear and devastating. Marcus's surveillance from a distance, his professional interactions, his inability to simply sit with his son, all of it had created an emotional vacuum that Luce had filled. "You're saying I'm a bad father?" "I'm saying trauma and loss affect everyone differently. Some people withdraw, some people throw themselves into solutions. Neither response is wrong, but both have consequences." Marcus stared at Jamie's medical charts, seeing his own failures reflected in every notation about improved stability during Luce's shifts. "What do you recommend?" "More family presence, real presence, not just visits. If Jamie is unconsciously seeking human connection, it should come from people who love him unconditionally. And if I can't provide that, then we need to understand why. And whether the barriers are external or self-imposed." Marcus left Dr. Morrison's office, carrying the weight of unwelcome insight. His surveillance had been about control, not connection. His money solved institutional problems, but couldn't bridge the emotional distance he'd created. Elena's ultimatum suddenly felt like salvation rather than threat. Perhaps transferring Jamie to a simpler facility would force the kind of presence that luxury couldn't provide. Perhaps proximity bred love, not the other way around. The decision crystallized at 3:17 a.m. while Marcus watched Luce reading to Jamie through his tablet screen. She'd reached the final chapter of The Tale of Peter Rabbit, her voice soft with the intimacy of bedtime rituals. Jamie's vital signs showed the subtle stability that had become Marcus's obsession. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Marcus wasn't watching from his penthouse. He was sitting in the corridor outside Jamie's room, laptop closed, surveillance abandoned. For the first time in 6 months, he was present in the same physical space as his son, during the hours when healing seemed most possible. When Luce finished reading, she noticed him immediately. Her expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that might have been approval. "Mr. Whitfield, Is everything all right? I wanted to be here, he said simply. With him. With you, if that's okay. Luz studied his face, searching for ulterior motives or hidden agenda. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Of course, he is your son. They entered Jamie's room together, an unlikely partnership formed by shared vigil. Luz resumed her cleaning with Marcus present, but her movements were more careful, aware of being observed by Jamie's father rather than hidden cameras. Tell me about the book, Marcus said quietly. About Miguel and the stories. Luz's hand stilled on the bedside table. Speaking about Miguel was still difficult, but something in Marcus's tone suggested genuine interest rather than polite curiosity. He was, how do you say, a dreamer, always asking questions about animals, about faraway places. The stories gave him adventures when he was too sick to have real ones. How long was he sick? 2 years. Leukemia. The word came out carefully, as if it still had power to wound. The treatments were expensive. I worked 3 jobs to pay for what insurance wouldn't cover. Marcus felt the familiar weight of financial privilege. His insurance covered everything without question. Elena's concerns about Jamie's costs were theoretical. They could afford decades of premium care without genuine hardship. I'm sorry. That must have been impossible. Not impossible, just not enough. Luz's voice carried the resignation of someone who'd fought a battle with predetermined outcomes. But the stories helped, even at the end, when the medicines stopped working. Miguel would ask for just one more tale. Is that why you read to the children here? See, because someone should. Because they need to know that even when their bodies sleep, their spirits can still have adventures. Marcus watched his son's face in the soft light Luz had arranged, seeing not the clinical subject of his surveillance, but a boy who might dream of rabbit adventures and hedgehog washerwomen. I used to read to him, Marcus admitted. Before the accident. We had a routine, 2 stories before bed, sometimes 3 if he negotiated well. What stories did he like? Harry Potter, Dr. Seuss, adventure books about kids who solved mysteries or found treasure. Marcus paused. I stopped reading to him after the accident. I told myself it was pointless because he couldn't hear me. You think he cannot hear? The doctors say his brain activity is minimal. The doctors, they see machines and numbers. But mothers, we see something else. Luz placed her hand on Jamie's arm. Feel his pulse when I speak to him. Really feel it. Marcus approached the bed hesitantly. Physical contact with Jamie had become medical rather than paternal. Checking for fever, adjusting position for comfort. But Luz guided his hand to Jamie's wrist, covering it with her own weathered fingers. Hola, Jamie. Luz said softly. Your papa's here. He wants to hear your heartbeat. Under their joined hands, Marcus felt a rhythm that wasn't just mechanical circulation. Something shifted in Jamie's pulse, subtle but undeniable. Did you feel that? Luz asked. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. For 6 months, he'd monitored Jamie's vital signs through electronic displays. But human touch revealed information that machines couldn't quantify. He knows when we are here, Luz said with quiet certainty. He knows when we care. Marcus stayed until dawn, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence while Luz worked around them. When her shift ended, she gathered her things but hesitated at the door. Mr. Whitfield, tomorrow is my day off, but I could come anyway, if you want to be here together. You don't have to. I want to. For Miguel. For Jamie. For you. After she left, Marcus remained in his son's room, watching morning light creep across the bed. Elena's deadline was still hanging over them. Dr. Blair's protocols still threatened Luz's assignment. The surveillance cameras still recorded everything. But something fundamental had shifted. Marcus was no longer watching his son's life from a distance. He was participating in it. The transformation had begun. The power outage struck at 2:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, plunging the hospital into emergency lighting. Backup generators hummed to life, maintaining life support systems but killing non-essential electronics, including Marcus's surveillance network. For the first time in months, the cameras went dark. Marcus discovered the outage from his penthouse, watching his tablet screens flicker to static. Panic seized him immediately, not for Jamie's medical safety, which was protected by redundant systems, but for his ability to observe. 3 months of compulsive watching had made surveillance feel like life support for his own peace of mind. He dressed frantically and raced to the hospital, finding corridors lit by ethereal emergency lighting. The building felt different without its electronic hum. Quieter, more human. Jamie's room glowed with battery-powered medical equipment and candles Luce had somehow procured. She sat beside the bed, holding Jamie's hand, her voice a steady murmur of Spanish prayers and English stories. "The power," Marcus began, "has been out for 20 minutes. Jamie is fine. The important machines have backup power." Luce's voice was calm, reassuring. "I brought candles from the chapel. The nurse said it was okay." The candlelight transformed the sterile room into something intimate and sacred. Jamie's face looked peaceful in the warm glow, more like a sleeping child than a medical case. "You stayed," Marcus observed. "Where else would I go? He needs someone here when things are frightening." Marcus realized she was right. The power outage, the altered lighting, the disrupted routine, these changes might register on some unconscious level. Jamie needed presence, not surveillance. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus told her. "About being here. Really being here. And I want to try something different. No more watching from a distance. I want to learn how to be his father again, not his guardian." Luce studied his face in the candlelight. "That is brave. That is necessary." They sat together in comfortable silence, taking turns reading to Jamie from Luce's collection of children's books. Marcus discovered that his voice had grown rusty from disuse, not in business meetings, where he commanded with authority, but in the gentle cadences required for bedtime stories. "You are out of practice," Luce observed with gentle humor. "I'm out of practice with many things. Reading to children is like riding a bicycle. The heart remembers even when the mind forgets." As the hours passed, Marcus found himself relaxing into patterns he'd forgotten. The rhythm of turning pages, the art of making different voices for characters, the satisfaction of completing a story well told. When Jamie's breathing shifted slightly during a particularly engaging passage, both adults froze. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered. "See, he likes adventure stories better than quiet ones." "How do you know?" His pulse changes, very small but consistent. Miguel was the same way. Peaceful stories made him sleepy, but adventure stories made his heart beat faster. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for Luce's experience, her intuitive understanding of how unconscious children responded to stimulation. She possessed knowledge no medical degree could provide, the wisdom of a mother who'd watched her child navigate the border between life and whatever came after. "Will you teach me," he asked, "how to read the signs, how to know what he needs? You already know. You just forgot how to trust what you know." When the power returned at dawn, fluorescent lights buzzing back to life, Marcus felt no urge to check his surveillance feeds. The cameras had been replaced by something more valuable, direct knowledge gained through presence rather than observation. Dr. Blair appeared during morning rounds, clipboard, armed with efficiency reports. "Mr. Whitfield, I understand you spent the night here during the outage. Was there a concern about your son's care during the emergency?" "No concern. I wanted to be present. The staff is trained for emergency protocols. Family presence isn't necessary." "It's necessary for me." Dr. Blair's expression sharpened. "I see. Well, visiting hours are clearly posted for family convenience." "I'm not visiting anymore," Marcus said quietly. "I'm participating." "After, Doctor." And Blair left, probably to document this new development in his efficiency reports. Luce gathered her things. "Tomorrow I work the day shift," she told Marcus, "but I can still read to Jamie in the evening, after my other work is done." "I'd like that. And Luz? I'm going to talk to my ex-wife about the transfer, about the costs. Jamie belongs here, with people who see him as more than a medical case, and with people who love him. Yes, with people who love him." Marcus spent the morning dismantling his surveillance system, removing cameras with the same methodical care he'd used to install them. The equipment felt foreign in his hands now, tools for watching rather than connecting. That evening, Eleanor arrived to find Marcus reading Charlotte's Web to their son, Luce quietly organizing flowers visitors had brought. The scene was so domestic, so unexpectedly normal, that Elena stood in the doorway for several minutes before announcing herself. "Marcus!" He looked up from the book, his finger marking their place in the story. "Elena, perfect timing. Jamie was just meeting Wilbur." For the first time since the accident, Marcus looked like a father instead of a businessman managing a crisis. Eleanor's transformation was quieter, but no less profound. She'd arrived prepared for another efficiency discussion, armed with spreadsheets comparing Connecticut facilities. Instead, she found herself watching Marcus read with the same gentle attention he'd once brought to bedtime routines years ago. "He's been like this all week," Luce explained quietly while Marcus finished the chapter. "Reading, talking, just being here." Elena studied her ex-husband with professional assessment. The tension that had defined him since the accident was gone. His shoulders were relaxed, his voice warm rather than controlled. He looked like the man she'd fallen in love with before success and ambition had hardened them both. "How are Jamie's numbers?" Elena asked. "Better," Marcus said without looking up from the book. "Not dramatically, but consistently. Dr. Morrison thinks the increased family presence is beneficial. Family presence meaning you, me, Luz, anyone who treats him like a person instead of a case study." Elena approached Jamie's bedside, noting changes she couldn't quantify. The room felt different, warmer, more lived in, fresh flowers, children's books, a small radio playing soft music. Someone had transformed medical space into something resembling home. "The Connecticut facility has excellent outcomes," Elena said, but her voice lacked its previous conviction. "Jamie isn't an outcome. He's our son. I know that. But we have to be practical. Do we?" Marcus closed the book and looked at her directly. "What if practical isn't what he needs? What if expensive isn't the problem, but distant is?" Eleanor had been prepared for many arguments, but not this one. Marcus, defending emotional reasoning over financial logic, violated everything she understood about his personality. "What's changed?" she asked. "I stopped watching and started seeing." Before Eleanor could ask what that meant, Dr. Morrison appeared with evening rounds. His surprise at finding both parents present was evident, but pleased. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, good to see you together. I have interesting news about Jamie's progress." Elena's attention sharpened. Progress. His sleep cycles have become increasingly normal. REM activity is up 20% from last month. Brainstem responses are more consistent. The neurological team is cautiously optimistic. "What does that mean practically?" Elena asked. "It means whatever environmental changes you've implemented should continue. Jamie's unconscious processes are stabilizing in ways we hadn't expected." Elena looked between Marcus and Luce, trying to understand what environmental changes could account for neurological improvement. "I've been spending more time here," Marcus explained. "Reading, talking, just being present. And Ms. Morales has been instrumental in establishing consistent patient interaction protocols," Dr. Morrison added. "The combination seems effective." After the doctor left, Elena sat in the chair Marcus had been occupying, studying Jamie's face with new attention. She'd been avoiding this, really looking at their son, seeing him as more than a medical situation requiring management. "He looks peaceful," she admitted. "He is peaceful," Luz said softly. "When people love him without fear, he feels that love, without fear. Sometimes parents are so afraid of losing their children that they forget to love them while they have them," Luz explained gently. "Fear makes us distant. Love makes us present." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been managing Jamie's care from Switzerland, treating his condition like a corporate crisis, requiring expert consultation and cost analysis. She'd been afraid to hope, so she'd chosen efficiency instead. "I want to cancel the Connecticut transfer," Elena heard herself say. Marcus looked up, surprised. "Elena? This is working. Whatever this is, it's working. I can see it." She reached for Jamie's hand, noting the warmth she'd forgotten to feel. "I can see him." They sat together, Marcus, Elena, and Luz, three adults who'd found different paths to the same destination, understanding that healing required more than medicine. "I have a proposal," Elena said. "What if I moved back from Switzerland, temporarily, to help with this presence approach?" "You'd do that? I'd do that for him, for us, for whatever family we're trying to rebuild." Luz gathered her things to leave, but Elena stopped her. "Luz, I don't know how to thank you for caring for Jamie, for teaching Marcus, teaching us what care actually means." "I do not need thanks," Luz replied. "I need Jamie to know he is loved. That is payment enough." As Luz left, Elena and Marcus sat in the quiet room, separated by months of grief, but united by renewed purpose. "I'm sorry," Elena said finally. Tragedy had changed them, but so had the possibility of something neither had expected, a second chance at being the parents Jamie needed them to be. Outside the window, the city sparkled with evening lights. But inside room 4217, three people had discovered that the most important transformations happened quietly, one story at a time. 3 weeks later, Jamie opened his eyes during the middle of the secret garden. Marcus was reading about Mary discovering the hidden door when he noticed the change. Not dramatic, just a subtle shift in breathing that made him look up from the page. Jamie's eyes were open, unfocused, but unmistakably aware. Marcus's voice caught. "For making this about money instead of love. I'm sorry for making it about control instead of connection." They weren't the same people who'd divorced 2 years earlier. The book trembled in his hands. "Eleanor," he whispered. She looked up from her laptop, where she'd been working while keeping Jamie company. Her gasp brought Luz running from the corridor. "Jamie?" Elena's voice was barely audible. "Baby, can you hear us?" Jamie's gaze moved slowly, tracking sounds and movements. When Luz approached the bed, his eyes found her face and lingered. His lips moved soundlessly. "What is he trying to say?" Elena asked. Luz leaned closer, her weathered hand finding Jamie's. "Hola, mijo," she whispered. Jamie's mouth shaped a single word. "Luz." The name came out cracked and barely audible, but unmistakable. His first word after 6 months of silence was for the woman who'd read him stories in the dark. Elena started crying. Marcus couldn't speak. Luz simply smiled and squeezed Jamie's hand. "See, it's me, and your mama and papa are here too." Jamie's eyes moved to his parents, recognition flickering like candle flame. "Mom? Dad?" The words were whispers, but they carried the weight of miracles. Dr. Morrison arrived within minutes, summoned by nurses who'd heard Elena's sobs of joy. His examination was thorough but careful, checking responses, testing cognition, documenting the impossible made real. "This is remarkable," he said finally. "Jamie, do you know where you are?" "Hospital," Jamie whispered. Then, with more strength, "Luz was reading to me about gardens." Over the following days, Jamie's awakening unfolded gradually. His memories were fragmented but present. He remembered the accident vaguely, remembered dreams that might have been stories, remembered feeling safe when certain voices spoke to him. "I dreamed about rabbits," he told Marcus during one quiet afternoon, "and a lady who sang in Spanish, and someone reading about magic places." "What else do you remember?" Elena asked gently. "Being scared sometimes. But then the singing would come back, or the stories, and I felt better." Luce had been present for Jamie's awakening, but as he grew stronger, she began returning to her regular duties. The boundaries Dr. Blair insisted upon suddenly made sense. Jamie needed his family now, not surrogate caregivers. "Will I still see you?" Jamie asked Luce during one of her visits. "Of course, mijo. But now you have your mama and papa here every day. They weren't before?" The innocent question cut through Marcus and Eleanor like surgery. How to explain surveillance versus presence to a 12-year-old who'd been unconscious through their learning curve. "We were scared," Marcus said honestly. "Sometimes when people are scared, they do things that don't make sense. We thought watching you from far away was helping, but being close to you was actually better." "Oh." Jamie considered this with the seriousness children brought to adult confessions. "Are you still scared?" "A little, but now we're scared together, as a family." Elena moved her law practice back to New York. Marcus restructured his business to allow for more flexible hours. Neither transformation was sacrifice. Both felt like coming home to priorities they'd misplaced. The surveillance equipment remained dismantled. Marcus had donated it to hospital security with a note, "For legitimate purposes only." Dr. Blair, faced with Jamie's remarkable recovery and the family's obvious transformation, grudgingly admitted that protocol violations sometimes produced positive outcomes. He still disapproved of Luce's boundary crossing, but couldn't argue with results. "Sometimes," Luce told Marcus one evening as they watched Jamie work on physical therapy exercises, "love finds a way to heal what medicine cannot reach." "Thank you," Marcus said, "for everything, for seeing Jamie when we forgot how to look." "You never forgot. You just needed to remember that love requires presence, not perfection." As Jamie grew stronger, the family discovered they were different than before. More honest, more present, more willing to accept help from unexpected sources. They'd learned that healing wasn't about expensive equipment or professional distance. It was about showing up, staying close, and trusting that love could reach places that surveillance never could. 6 months after Jamie's awakening, Marcus stood in the hospital's new family reading room, watching Luce teach other parents the art of bedside storytelling. The space had been his idea, funded by the Whitfield Foundation, but designed around Luce's wisdom about what children needed during healing. "The voice matters more than the words," Luce was explaining to a father whose daughter was recovering from surgery. "Children hear love before they hear stories." Marcus smiled, recognizing the lesson that had transformed his own understanding of care. The foundation had grown beyond his initial vision, becoming something Elena and Luce had helped shape into reality. Programs that emphasized human connection in medical settings, training for staff about patient interaction, and resources for families learning to navigate extended hospital stays. Jamie appeared at Marcus's elbow, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still rebuilding strength, but no longer fragile. At 13, he was taller, more thoughtful, carrying the quiet wisdom of someone who'd traveled to the edge of loss and returned. "How's the reading class?" Jamie asked. "Good. Luce is teaching Mr. Rodriguez how to do character voices." They watched through the window as Luce demonstrated different voices for where the wild things are, the father following her example with growing confidence. "She taught you that too," Jamie observed. "She taught me many things." Elena joined them, carrying coffee and the satisfaction of someone who'd found meaningful work. Her law practice now included medical advocacy, helping families navigate hospital systems with the same intensity she'd once applied to corporate mergers. The board approved the expansion, she announced. "We'll have reading rooms in 5 more hospitals by next year, and the training program fully funded. Luz will oversee implementation at each location." They'd offered Luz a supervisory position, but she'd negotiated for something different, the freedom to move between hospitals, teaching staff and families about the invisible work of emotional care. She remained a cleaning woman by title, but had become something more important, a guardian of human connection in institutional spaces. "Will you still read to me sometimes?" Jamie asked Luz when she finished the class. "Always, mijo. Though now you read better stories than I do." It was true. Jamie had become a voracious reader during recovery, devouring adventures he'd missed while unconscious. But he still preferred being read to when nightmares came or anxiety made sleep elusive. "I want to show you something," Marcus said, leading his family to Jamie's former room. It'd been converted into a consultation space where families could meet with social workers and chaplains, but the window still overlooked the city Marcus had once watched through security feeds. "I used to stand here and think I could control everything by watching from a distance," Marcus said. "I thought surveillance was the same as care." "But it wasn't," Jamie asked, though he knew the answer. "No. Care requires getting close enough to be changed by what you're caring for." They stood together looking out at Manhattan, no longer a collection of properties to acquire, but a community they were part of. Marcus's business continued to thrive, but he'd learned to delegate more, trust more, measure success in ways that couldn't be quantified on quarterly reports. "I have an idea for the next expansion," Elena said. "What if we created spaces for siblings? Other family members who need support during medical crises? Kids helping kids," Jamie added. "I could talk to other children who are scared about surgery or treatment." Luz nodded approvingly. Healing spreads when people share their stories. As evening approached, they walked together through corridors Marcus had once monitored through cameras. Night shift staff nodded greetings. They knew this family, had watched them transform from distant observers to active participants in Jamie's care. "Will you miss it here?" Eleanor asked Jamie as they reached the main entrance. "Sometimes, but I think I learned everything I needed to learn." "What did you learn?" Marcus asked. Jamie considered carefully. "That being unconscious doesn't mean being alone, and that love works even when you can't see it working." Outside, the city hummed with evening energy. Marcus no longer felt separate from it all. Watching from penthouses and boardrooms, the cameras were gone, the surveillance abandoned, but he could see more clearly than ever before. "Dinner?" Elena suggested. "At home," Marcus said. "I'll cook." "You cook now?" Luz asked with amused surprise. "I'm learning. Like everything else, showing up, staying present, trusting the process." They walked together into the New York evening, an unlikely family bound by shared understanding of what mattered most. Behind them, the hospital glowed with lights and life, filled with other families beginning their own journeys toward healing. In room 4217, a new patient slept, while his mother read softly from a worn children's book, her voice carrying the same mixture of hope and love that had once reached into darkness to call a boy back to life. The cameras recorded nothing, but love continued its quiet work, invisible, immeasurable, and infinitely powerful.